So this session, number 6 of the day, was designed to allow folks who could not attend earlier sessions because they were busy working and having a life to still have an opportunity to address any of the issues that we've talked about today. Or candidly, if there are other issues you want to bring up, we can certainly talk about those too. So what we talked about today, I should look. I don't have my phone anymore. I should look and make sure I remember them correctly. So we talked about education and language in our first meeting. Sorry, admitting some folks. So the purpose of this is of this meeting is to make sure that folks who were unable to meet the earlier meeting still have a chance to participate in the work groups. So we started off talking about education and talked about the kinds of information that was missing and the different communication avenues that were open to us and the best way to really try and dig into and support folks who, how we could get information to people, what the best way was. We also talked about the avenues for communication. Then we had a conversation on standard operating procedures, which was sort of a high-level conversation about enforcement, sort of general information, and internal communications about enforcement, what investigations, identification, investigation, and then enforcement, and what those 3 areas, what information they needed, and what information we could ask or suggest that CDHS look at, among other things. Then we talked about statutes and regulations and sort of where we saw some changes that could be made. Statutes we wish we had, inconsistencies. We specifically talked about fines and how that process worked. We talked about the scope of exempt care and whether that was clear. And then we talked about just some other options, other things we could sort of look at as far as legislation or changes. Then we talked about the fatality review conversation about what the fatality review process looks like and how it would involve near fatal incidents or egregious actions, and how we would involve law enforcement as well as social services and hospitals and other stakeholders in that conversation, and where there was strong communication and where there was communication that could be improved. We also had a conversation specifically about what information law enforcement could provide to support this effort and how we could support law enforcement by increasing their knowledge or shifting their knowledge. They specifically asked for information about or we identified that there was an opportunity to provide them with information about how to read a license and understand sort of what that capacity looks like, about the different kinds of care, licensed, exempt, and needs a license but doesn't have one. And we talked about just sort of safe care in general. We learned a little bit about the way that law enforcement collects information while they're on a call and how we could best get that information from point A to point B. So now we're here with you. So I'll turn this over. I have no agenda for this call. I will turn this over to you and allow folks who have things they want to raise them.
I have a question or kind of a food for thought thing. Where are we defining what safe care is? Because I know it got brought up about what OECs is, and that does have pertain to licensed, but with so many changes of the license exempt and all of that, is there a place where we could actually define or make a flyer of exactly what safe care is that we can share with parents and share with providers to be able to know what is entailed with that, what to look for with that safe care policy?
That's a good question. And there is a lot wrapped up in safe care, right? So safe care, because safe care can exist in all possible locations. It can exist with friends, family, and neighbor. It can exist with, unlicensed exempt, with home providers, with licensed large care providers. I think when we think about that, there's currently a checklist that was shared in the earlier groups that we can certainly share again, that talks about sort of here's what to look for when you're looking at care and when you're looking for that. And so that's a starting point. I think the concept of safe care for the purposes of this conversation also includes some of those subtleties of licensed, exempt, not exempt, those sort of concepts as well. And then I know someone I think the first meeting shared a link to an entire curriculum about safe care. So we could sort of distill some of that down. So I think those are all good questions. Those are all good questions. And I think we can investigate that a little more.
I just see as, working with Office of Early Childhood, their biggest thing is licensed care. They're, the getting licensed and being licensed. And I understand that, but as we move forward with all the different areas and trying to cover there, again, the whole entire state is, licensed care is not always an option in the rural areas. There's not always a space for that and a place that is even feasible. And so I just, with, OEC being the housing of licensing and all that, and I know we're trying to get them to be the housing of the cease and desist orders of unlicensed care, but I just also wonder if, are they willing to branch out into that realm of license exempt care as well? And, just creating, it goes back to that one-stop shop place of, we need to have a place where we can have everything, but that's not always a easy task.
Sure. What I hear you saying is when you're dealing with care that is exempt from licensing, it's unlicensed and it's exempt, how can we help folks in that space, both physically in the space where licensed care isn't an option or it's not financially feasible or it's just not, doesn't work for your family, and then also just in that discussion space, how can we help folks identify safe care in that exempt area?
Right. And within their, and even within their culture of, area and their community.
Mm-hmm. This is great. So hopefully what I'm hoping is as we sort of gather these questions and these sorts of additional points, we'll identify what our next work group questions are going to be about, right? So
do you remember what the safe care curriculum thing, who put that out this morning? Because I remember her talking about that, but I can't remember who it was done by.
Smart Choices Safe Kids. Let me look for that in my notes, and then I'll try to be sure to bring that to our meeting on the 1st. If not, we'll ask everyone.
No, that's fine. I know. I think it was one of the Katie's that brought it up, but
yes, I think you're probably right.
Yes, it was Katie with Illuminate. Thank you, Lindley.
Perfect. Yeah, Illuminate would be J. Yeah, perfect. All right.
So I just wanted to share, Laura, with all of these conversations going on with legal, illegal care. I know you've seen the graphics that our organization has put out, and we've been posting on social media. I just realized I had a person reach out to me today on social media asking me about exempt care and saying, well, I'm doing this. Is this exempt? My neighbor is doing this. Is this exempt? So there's a lot of confusion for her. Her main question was, well, I'm watching kids on a regular basis, but their days vary. You know, they don't come every Monday, Tuesday. They might come Monday, you know, like say their mom's a restaurant worker. And so they
Right.
have varying shift, but it's still regular care. And so I think there's still a lot of people don't understand. The messaging needs to be clearer for families. What is legal? Because I have no problem if you're providing legal exempt care, but
Yes.
if you don't understand even how to qualify for legal exempt care, then there's some messaging and problems going on.
Yes, let me see. Okay, I'm gonna pull this up.
Because the definition is regular care, a
Yes,
care that has a pattern. So I told this individual, if you are providing care on a weekly basis, that becomes a regular pattern. Even if the days are varying, you're
mhm,
providing regular care. And
mhm,
as long as she stays underneath the 4, she would be exempt. But she said her neighbor had 5 kids over at her house the other day, and she said it was still fine because the kids come on different days every week, but there were 5 there at once.
mhm.
So there's just a lot of misunderstanding. I think there just needs to be better messaging to the public so people can follow the legal exemption.
I think that makes perfect sense.
I would agree with you, Carrie, because even if there's the same kids throughout the month, but maybe they come Monday, Tuesday, one week, Wednesday, Thursday, the next, that's still a regular set of kids. They just maybe come on the same day. We as full-time licensed providers can get that too, where they can come 4 days, 1 week, or their
Mhm.
parents are shift work. So they're nurses or doctors or whatever, and they come different times. So that definitely needs to be addressed.
Let me
Right.
show this to you and I'll show you where I think that would go. If you look, can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
This is statute 266103, and it talks about, this is part 1 of the regulations, which is licensed care, right? And so this starts off, this, admit Aaron, it says application is present, the part 1 does not apply to special schools, a child care facility, which is licensed, facilities operated in connection with a church or businesses. And what you're talking about now is this one, occasional care of children that has no apparent pattern and occurs with or without compensation. So where I think that overlaps with what you all are talking about is there may be no apparent pattern in that shift work is different and folks come and go with or without compensation, fine. But it's the occasional care of children piece. Is it really occasional if it happens every week? It's just at different times.
Right,
And so
because
we could create, either in a standard operating procedure or in a regulation, just really flesh out what that means.
right, because I was always told that occasional care meant babysitting.
Yes, I think that's true.
So, and for short periods of time, that's defined as 3 hours. For C, that's defined as 3 hours or less within a 24-hour period.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I would just love to see better messaging out there, maybe an FAQ
Mhm.
where, we can say in this stipulation, am I exempt or do I need a license? Just a really good FAQ with lots of different examples so
Mhm.
families can understand the provider and families.
I think that's great. And then I think we can also put that into statute as well and say, after this D, for the purposes of this section, quote, occasional care means blah. Let's just say it. Let's just say it. And that way it's crystal clear. And then
I
This
think
is-
one of the other things with that occasional care, a good example is, so I'm also licensed with the military. I have a DOD contract.
okay.
And so one of their stipulations for being for on base is they consider occasional care 10 hours or less a week, with no more than a 2-hour time span. So maybe we need to put in a time limit too. I mean, because like Carrie's saying, occasional care is like the babysitting, your friend's going to the gym or something. So maybe we need to define better definition of that, of, how many hours,
Is that
not
all?
just in a 24-hour period.
Are you the one who's talking right now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I just couldn't see because I'm still sharing my screen.
Oh.
Could you email me that regulation? Do you know where it is?
I can I can have them pull it up and send it to me.
That would be great, just because I love starting from a place where someone smart has already put some language in place.
I just know that I know it's a Department of Defense regulation for all FCs, they call them FCCs on military bases. So if you're on any garrison, that's what they call a base.
Mhm.
You cannot provide more than 10 hours of care, or you have to become registered, which would be the equivalent of being licensed off base. And they have stiff regulations. I mean, if you're caught doing it, you lose base housing on any base you go to from there on out.
Mhm.
So, I mean, there's regulations in effect, like that for the military. There should be something like that for us off base too.
It does make sense. Also, I look at this, for this purpose of this section, quote, short periods of time means fewer than 3 hours. What's the distinction? Why would we have a definition for short periods of time that is that specific when we don't have the same for definition of occasional? We could streamline the statute and say, occasional care means short periods of time, no more than 10 hours in a week, or something
Yeah.
along those lines.
The short periods of time is for letter C for facilities with a
Yeah.
church and shopping center.
And
So
that's for the IKEA.
Yeah.
club.
So Kansas also has a statute where you must be registered or licensed if you go over X number of hours per week providing care. Because my sister's friend refused to do daycare for her temporarily because she knew it would be illegal because it was too many hours per week.
If your sister can find that, I'd love to see that.
I don't think she can, but I can search and see if I can find it.
If not, I can. All right, Sarah, I see you raising your hand.
Okay, so is there any way that you can put in there, because I know this is a big thing too that I've noticed, is people try to get away with using nannying is a way of
Yes.
out of it, or out of not having to follow exemptions, and they just say that they're exempt because they're nannying, which they're not, because a lot of them are still over, even though it's not at their home, it's still.
Mhm. So maybe we can make clear that exempt care, that these limitations are limitations regardless of whether it happens in your home or someone else's home, because a nanny share, if you had a nanny, which, who only cared for who was related, like this one here, this guy here, A, then it could be okay, except it's talking about they are related to the caregiver. So, let's see, related as defined to the caregiver are children who are related to each other as siblings from a single family or as a combination of such children. So here I would say this A is if you're a nanny and you're taking care of a family, a single family, that's okay. But once you start involving more than one family, then I think you have an issue.
Right.
Okay, I like it.
No, I don't think they do have.
What?
Alma thought they had their own set of rules,
Nanny?
statutes. No, nannying has no rules, none.
Okay, I didn't know. I just
No.
thought that when it come to nanny and it was done in the person's home. So
Well-
if you're bringing somebody else's kids in, that wouldn't be nannying them.
So because I actually have a friend of ours that's a nanny, and I actually used to do nannying too years ago. Normally it's basically, if you go to somebody else's home, and it's usually just one family, but over the years, they've gotten to where they do the nanny shares. And that's when they bring in multiple families into one home, kind of like a pod,
Mhm.
the one home. And some have 3-4 kids, and then the other ones have 2 or 3 kids, and there you've got a nanny share,
Yeah.
and you're out of licensing. And there is no rules, because that's one thing that I was talking to my friend about, and she's like, one thing she doesn't like, because she does have ECE, but she's like, that's one thing I'm not in agreement with. She's like, is because there's no regulations whatsoever. If you were like, say, if you're with a nanny company or whatever, there's nothing, you have to take their own little classes. None of the ECE classes transfer over. And there's no requirements. There's no CPR, first aid, nothing. It's just at your own risk.
I think maybe whoever was thinking that there were regulations, there are quite a few regulations related to au pairs. So
Right.
for folks, if you're bringing someone over from another country to serve as your nanny who's living with you, you're providing a car, there are a lot of, I think there are federal actually regulations because it's more of an immigration issue. And because you can only pay them X number of dollars, they can't work more than X number of hours. So that might be what you're thinking of. Or maybe
Yeah.
not.
Yeah,
Okay,
unfortunately,
that maybe that was, I wasn't sure if there was or
Yeah.
not, so I thought I would ask.
Yeah, no, it's great. That's
Nope.
exactly the conversation we should be having here.
right.
What other issues did folks want to raise that they didn't get to raise earlier? Or are there any additional recaps that you'd like to hear from?
I was told that nannies are kind of grouped in with the exemption for family childcare homes. So there's really no regulations, but they're kind of grouped in with us because they don't have their own set of regulations. So they fall underneath that exemption, which is why the exemption was changed a few years ago, which would to make nanny shares legal. I think another great thing to bring up is that for a family childcare home, it is the property and the individual that is licensed. So I can be a licensed childcare provider, but I'm not allowed to go over to one of my family's house and provide licensed childcare in their home. It's my,
Right.
so I think that needs to be said too, that it is the property and the individuals that are licensed.
Yeah.
And I did find the Kansas website and threw it in the chat for you.
Oh, thank you.
It's 20 hours a week.
Would
If you
that
go-
include being exempt as well? Because you can go to somebody else's home and be
Yes,
exempt,
so-
couldn't you?
Yes,
you
you
do
can be exempt
something
and go
that-
into, yes, you can go into somebody else's home and be exempt as long as you are still following that number of children rule.
Oh, I lost you.
What other questions do folks have?
I'm sorry,
Here-
my phone cut out. You can be, I did not hear what you said, Carrie.
You can be exempt whether you're working in your own home or someone else's, as long as you're providing care for no more than 4 children. That's
Okay.
that's where, so if you could be exempt as a nanny.
Okay, so
Uh,
that's what exempting, okay, that makes sense.
And this is based on our general understanding and my quick review of the statute. That's not legal advice, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay,
Carrie, I like that where it says 20 hours and you're adding each child's hours up, because that's where you would get away from that irregular care sort of.
mm-hmm. I do like that too.
Or why don't I pull it up so folks can see? Schools. Okay. Oops. Here we go, Kansas. So is this where you're looking? Childcare is provided for children in
Yes.
their own home, meaning the home of the children. So it's both, not just in your own home, who are relatives to the childcare provider, arranged between friends or neighbors on an irregular basis, or when childcare is provided for not more than 2 children, unrelated for not more than 20 care hours a week. Is that what you're looking at?
Yeah, that's what I was looking at because, I mean, my sister's friend couldn't do it because it would be more than 20 hours a week, or there
Yeah.
was, a couple other kids and she's like, I can't go over those hours.
I would
I
be
like this.
concerned about really limiting it to 20 hours total because that would be a considerable restriction from our current exempt care, which allows care for 4 children. Because would be, so providers who previously were exempt now would not be exempt.
For sure. This is
Yeah.
way more restrictive but it does give an example where hours are
Yeah.
used.
I like that. I like that as a concept, and how can we use this kind of concept, perhaps in defining what occasional care is, or I like that.
Well, Laura, in one of the previous groups, we mentioned about like FFNs or having a registration, like if you have 4 kids registering. So if you weren't registered, then you go to that hour limit. you know, I mean, having a database of registered people that are
Yeah.
going 4 and under is a great way for parents to say, oh, you are registered, you can only have 4
Yeah.
versus not having anything.
There was, I raised that in an earlier issue, or earlier meeting, and there was some significant pushback, because that makes sense to me as a person, but there was some significant pushback, and I candidly can't remember right now if it was more logistics or if there was another concern.
I think it's logistics, and you don't want to have to require every grandma and every aunt to register when they're watching their own children or nieces and nephews or grandchildren and fall under the exemption. The registration would be better applied if you were caring for non-related children, but you can't expect every relative to register when they're providing care for their own relation.
No, I agree with that, Carrie. Like, I mean, if you're a grandma watching your grandkids, why would you have to register? But if they're not related to you, I think you should have to.
I will
think
absolutely
it-
include that, yeah. Because I think that's where understanding the feasibility of a suggestion that makes perfect sense, I think is important, is in digging in and saying, okay, what would this look like? And what would this look like in the FFN community? And what would this look like for licensing as far as, you know, the bandwidth that they would have to do it? But my understanding is there's currently, I'm probably speaking out of turn. Mark, maybe you can answer this. I don't know if you're available, but is there some voluntary registration if you want to be entitled to particular benefits?
I think I heard my name. I apologize. I'm not familiar with that. I don't have. an
Yeah.
answer for that,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
okay, so that we can certainly dig into that, because that's my understanding is that there's an option if you're looking for particular benefits, but who knows? I could have dreamt that, but we can certainly look into that a little bit.
If you're doing CCAP and you're an FFN, yes, you have to register.
Maybe that's just what I'm thinking of.
But that's the only time you would have to register is if you're getting CCAP benefits, because there is that option of grandma's watching the kids, the mom's on CCAP, and the grandma can get paid. So, you know, there's that.
It's the qualified exempt.
Thank you. I
That
couldn't
would
remember the exact
register.
name of it.
But to your point, Laura, earlier, one of the other things about a registration was those who are doing the FFN care, but are hesitant to give their information to a government entity as well.
Yeah. All right, what other discussion points did those of you who couldn't attend, or those of you who did attend and just would like a little more follow-up?
I
What
would like to see out of the statutes, if we're gonna look at statutes and rules, which I think they're coming open, is if the legal unlicensed can have 4 kids, why can't we raise the ratio and license home? We would get more licensed spots available, which then would keep these families from turning to illegal unlicensed care.
Yeah, I've gotten both feedback on the number one thing we need to do to keep kiddos safe is to reduce ratio. And then I've heard from other people that we need to increase it because it keeps folks in safe, you know, in safe homes. So I think that discussion of what the appropriate ratio is always important. And that's why I think every time there's a rule rewrite, it's important to log in and provide your comments and say, here, you know, it sounds great to reduce ratio because then you have more adult kid time, but here's the reality. We actually need to go the other direction in order to make sure that, number one, these family homes stay in business, and also so that we can provide care for more kiddos.
Well, and maybe one of the things too is to look at other states and what they have their ratios. I mean, I know there's some states that it's a 12-to-1 ratio based on ages. There's some that are 10-to-1. There's some states that don't count infants after, they're not infants after one, and stuff. So maybe that's something to, as we're looking at that, look
Yeah.
at those other states. And what is the fatality rate in licensed care with that number of kids? Is there a larger, accident and things like that? What is it working? Is it not working?
Sure.
To be able to adapt something for us.
I
I
once
brought
had,
this up to Laura this week as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I had emailed her about this exact thing that we're talking about. And I had made the suggestion of even waivers until at least we can get more family providers back in the loop of licensed providers back in to where we can get more people. Because we are in a huge demand for especially infant care. So even maybe doing to where we can at least, if we can't get ratio up, at least getting waivers to those in some way of, I don't know, proving or whatever that we qualify, or I guess, or educationally or something like that, versus looking at like violations and all that. I don't know.
I think ratios would be easier to increase than the number of children in an exempt unlicensed home, because an exempt unlicensed home is in statute. So that would require a statutory decision. So a waiver of ratio would be a stringency or hardship waiver, and I would ask for a waiver rather than an appeal. An appeal, you have to wait until you violate. So some sort of a waiver.
At least until we can see Colorado get more spaces open for infant and toddlers.
I hear your concerns.
I just have a question, and I don't know if Mark or Lindley know this. The spreadsheet that Karen shared earlier today with the cease and desist, is that completely up to date? Because one of my previous families was in a setting that was received a cease and desist, and I do not see that individual's name on the list. So I was just curious if that list was complete or incomplete.
It was shared internally, and it was, I would say, updated mid last week. When was this cease order issued? Can I ask that?
I believe it was in October of 2020. I have a copy.
Okay.
I have a copy of it. I have a copy of it on the email because I requested a file review simply because the person was showing up on Shines.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
When I say updated, it was shared with licensing specialists and supervisors, and we're, I guess, updating it as we speak. So there might be some ones that slipped through the cracks or stragglers that we're still updating with.
Okay, because yeah, like I said,
to pull back from a handful of years.
I like I said,
I
I have a file review that shows the cease and desist letter, but I don't see the individual's name or their address on that spreadsheet.
I'll look
Carrie,
into that. I'll look into that to see where we are with it internally. To make sure it's still being attacked with 3+ years within there. But I do
Carrie,
know
did that-
go ahead. Sorry.
I was gonna say, Carrie, did that person have a license number? Because I found when looking at the stuff, there's another section, if they had a license number, were given a cease and desist.
So this individual did have an application that they either submitted before the cease and desist letter or after, but they were providing illegal care. So
Okay.
they were not within the exemption, but I believe after the cease and desist letter, licensing told me they did apply for a license, but they have not completed the application process.
Oh, okay, because I found another section that showed if they had a license and their license was suspended or whatever when looking at that today.
It's possible it's a young tool and it's just not 100% there yet, but that's a good, if there are categories that are missing, we can certainly circulate that and make sure that there isn't, a category or a group of cease and desist letters that somehow fell through the cracks.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like you said, Laura, it is a young living document that we
Yeah.
just started implementing And that we shared internally just, I believe, a week ago to make sure we have all the cease orders reflected on there. So it could possibly still be being updated from the previous years.
Sure. I think today was just posted hours ago, so it's possible. Mark, is there a particular person to whom was it Carrie? Was you the one who raised the issue? Should send her concerns or a copy of that letter?
You know what, just to make it easy, you could send this information to me and I could distribute as necessary. Let me give you my email address over chat.
Thanks, Mark.
Of course, you're welcome. There you go. So yeah, please don't hesitate. Feel free to send me that information or any questions related to that or anything else for that matter. And I can make sure the proper people receive it, including Laura. Make sure she has eyes on it as well.
So what other topics are burning for folks? We've got another 25 minutes, 24 minutes. So what other issues did you either not have a chance to explore fully earlier today, or were you hoping to get more information? Or what issues would you like to see discussed going forward as it relates to our discussion?
I have a question, Laura, and this might be for Mark. But we talked a little bit earlier about statutes regarding how the Attorney General's office has to hand out those fines and things like that. And with the cease and desist orders, from what I got from Karen stating that that procedure is going to now be changing, is there also something changing where we don't have to wait for the time of those fines being issued? Or is there something written, and there can be wrote in there, where there is almost like something even lower than what the first level of the Attorney General does, where it puts a hold on the care that is being provided? That way surveillance can be conducted. Like, almost like an eviction notice where they're given 30 days if it's their first cease and desist. And I wrote in an email to you about this, where there's then that 30 days where CDHS can conduct that surveillance and see if there is actually unexempt, unlicensed taking place. And within that time, that provider also has the ability to start the application process if they want to become licensed or make changes so that they are legally exempt. And if they haven't done that step, or one of those steps within that 30 days, is that enough time for the Attorney General's office to allow those fines to be issued, or those charges then for the petty offense to happen?
I like your question. I don't know that we talked about it a little bit earlier. I'm not sure everyone totally understands how, or I don't at least, how the fines provision will be changing. Let me just share my screen so folks can see where that language is. And then I would like the opportunity to sort of dig into that with folks who have done more of the statutory analysis and try and figure that out. Because what we're looking at here is, this is the fines. It says these two provisions talk about the amount of fines. And so one of the discussions we had in the statutory group is if the civil penalty is, and this would apply, for example, to someone who is providing care that would require a license, but they don't have a license, right? So someone who has more than 4 kiddos, et cetera, not related, and they're providing care. So this is $100 a day to a maximum of 10,000. There's a separate offense, is each separate day. And then here, the department may assess a civil penalty. That language sounds like OEC could issue the fine, but it says in conformity with the provisions, obviously written by a lawyer, because who needs those big words, according to the procedure in Article 424. And that's the part about going through the Attorney General's office and through the Office of Administrative Courts. Now, Mark had shared a process that he had used in the, and I don't think you've shared it this time around yet, Mark, although my brain is getting a bit
No.
trippy.
Yeah,
About the
it's been a long day.
Yeah, about with the electricians, that might be a model that we could use.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, when I was the program director for the Electrical and Plumbing Board, of course, it was in our statutes allowing for this authority. Our field inspectors, when they go out on the job site, were able to issue a fine right off the bat in the field. And, there's a fine schedule, and there's a myriad of things they could issue fines on. So yeah, that was in our statute, and we had the authority for that. And unfortunately, right now, there isn't that authority. If you want to find somebody, it has to go through the lengthy process through the Office of Administrative Courts. So that definitely is something that the work group will be looking into for that possible statute change.
because to your point, Kelsey, I think I understood also that Ellie's bill would contain a more, immediate alternative for fines. I just haven't seen how it fits together with our current system. So I don't feel like I can provide that info.
Yeah, and I guess that's where I'm kind of coming from the angle
Yeah.
of up until Ellie's death, and afterwards in communication with different people, it was always, well, we don't have the control of that. We're not able to go in and issue that. And that wasn't something that was specifically wrote into Ellie's law either. So it kind of then falls right back into the limbo land of
Yeah.
who does have the control of that, who can issue that. And with CDHS being able to write their own regulations, and if it does have to be a statute, where it's something like Mark says, there's a council that's created
Mhm.
and we're able to go out and issue a fine based off of what we've seen, or if they're trying to establish probable cause or a pattern of care, and here they have had 7 different call-ins of unlicensed, unexempt care, that to me, in my mind, would be establishing a pattern thereon. I mean, 2 would be establishing a pattern in my mind. You shouldn't have to have more than that. 1, you get a warning, we check it out. 2, this is the stage that we're at and we're taking a more hands-on approach. So that's kind of where I was coming from, especially with what I've understood with Karen, is if they're going to be changing the process of issuing cease and desist orders, and now specifically only issuing them if they see unsafe care, yet in some circumstances, they're not making that personal contact, or, dropping by at those drop off and pickup times, or, leaving a business card on the door, speaking to somebody through a door cam, that doesn't allow the department to try to see if there is unsafe care being provided. And then it kind of goes against Ellie's law, where, the law states that it's not just the first cease and desist order, but it's after one. So it gives the provider or the person the benefit of the doubt. It gives that grandma the benefit of the doubt that they are providing legal, exempt, or licensed care. And so that's where my worry
Yeah.
is if we're now not issuing cease and desist orders like we were beforehand, and we're not taking the opportunity to issue or investigate those calls and complaints during drop off and pickup times, but at midday, early afternoon, late morning, how are we even going to be able to establish if there is unsafe care? And how are we going to be able to inform parents through a platform that was just created to meet part of that purpose?
I think some of the information that you're talking about, first of all your concerns are valid. That makes total sense. If what you described is what's happening, then that is of a concern. I think what Karen was saying is that the first time they show up, they're going to drop off an information piece, right? And that's the, okay, everyone, understand what's happening. And then the cease and desist letter would come after that. And I didn't hear her say that they wouldn't go up, pick up and drop off. But what I also hear you saying, which I think is incredibly valid, is if we are gonna, if Ellie's Law is viewed as somehow heightening the importance or the impact of cease and desist letters, so we're going to issue fewer of them, something else has to accelerate, right? We have to do something else more quickly. So if we're going to look at cease and desist letters and say these were a big stick before, and so now we're going to make them a bigger stick, so we're going to use them less often, something else has to take its place, and maybe that's a fine. Without going through this whole process, because if the reaction to Ellie's Law is just now everything is pushed out more, then the spirit of it is not being met. Is that what I hear you saying?
Yeah, definitely. Just like, if the purpose of the law, I mean, there are many different levels to it, but one was to give parents like our family that platform on Colorado Shines when we went and searched the provider's name, for those cease and desist orders to pull up. And I understand their viewpoint of not every time that they issue a cease and desist order is somebody providing unexempt, unlicensed care.
Yeah.
And so I totally, and that's one of the things that I put in my email to you is when they issue that cease and desist order, if it's the first one, they're also issuing those pamphlets and that education, because there was education already on those orders. It states the law, but also including nonprofit organizations that help. So those people who are not licensed, who have trouble with, well, I don't know how to become, and financially it just doesn't work for me because I have to pay to take these classes and I have to pay to get these certificates, and all of these excuses that they have, the education piece with those pamphlets and stuff. But yes, in the same hand, with Ellie's Law, we now have stricter, you can be charged a petty offense. That now goes on to a background check. A parent who's doing a background check can pull that up. If we're not going to be giving those cease and desist orders out like we have been, or they have been, I haven't given any, so I don't know why I'm saying we.
It's hard. I've been saying we all day, and it's not me. It's not.
But if they're not being distributed, and at the same time it's taking 2 months to get through the Attorney General's office to issue a fine or an injunction or what have you, then I feel like we're at stalemate. And those, while not all of them are like what we've experienced in the master manipulators, those ones that do know how to work the system will continue, and those are the ones that are the most dangerous.
I appreciate your perspective and also your familiarity with the bill and the purpose of it. So I think we can dig into that. Fines it was an area I think we can try and get some more clarity.
Maybe there needs to be a timeline put into the statutes that when the cease and desist letter is, or like Kelsey's saying, they've given 30 days. They haven't either applied for a license, whatever. Maybe that timeline needs to be pushed up faster before going to the AG. Like in the 30 days, they haven't done this. Now we push it to the AG. They have 15 days to correct it, to do something with it, for a fine or court case or something like that. I mean, we've got to push this up. We've got to quit. We got to quit giving multiple cease and desist. That's the purpose. Yeah, I mean, we just have got to stop. I mean, it's not going to save children. We're not going to have safe children if they get 7, 8, 9, or 10 cease and desist letters. That's not going to help. We need to streamline and speed up the process at the AG side of it. Is my opinion.
Got it.
I agree. Or like Mark was saying, establish an area where it's a step below AG, still involving AG, but saying here, we're going to go ahead and give you that fine at that 30-day mark if you haven't made a change. We've already ran surveillance to establish the type of care that you're providing. Now that we've given you that fine, you can come to our board and you can try to fight it or deny it. And within that period of time, it's at the AG, and with the conclusion of if the fine goes through or if there is a misunderstanding, we issue them, or they're issued the injunction in that time. Like, it just has to be a more streamlined process.
Yeah, I think we would have, putting on my constitutional considerations hat, I think we'd have greater success accelerating the fine piece than the, take away your license, property right in your license, kind of because of the constitutional issues around that being property. I wonder where the Constitution would come in with unlicensed non-exempt care, because then you don't have property that you'd need due process before you can take it away, kind of thing. So I think that would be an interesting discussion about which of those pieces we can accelerate and which are going to ultimately require just the reality of more time. But I also, to the extent we can develop faster procedures than what we're currently using, like your point, if the AG can move more quickly for some reason, then I think that's an important question for them to answer.
Well, I
And
think
we're-
money is a big motivator in this factor. If you look at unlicensed, unexempt providers,
Mhm.
a lot of them are doing it, not claiming it on their taxes, even though the parents who are taking their children there. And so if you're going to fine them up to $10,000 or offer them the ability to become licensed or change so that they qualify for those exemptions, I think that they're going to be motivated by that money. It's kind of like when, somebody in Colorado receives so many DUIs and they go to the court and the judge says, you can go to rehab or you can go to prison. More than likely, they're going to try to choose rehab. They're going to try to choose that path. And I think that if we, again, I don't know why I'm saying we, I think that if the government or an entity were to provide that type of thing to a habitual offender, putting children at an unsafe place,
Mhm.
just as somebody does who consumes alcohol or substances and then drives, if you're offering them, we will help you and guide you through this process, or you can pay the amount of fines that it would cost you to be put into that process in the first place. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm. Mhm.
if we're going to have to take a little bit, if we're going to have to take evil's hand and guide it one direction or the other, I would assume with money as the motivator for a lot of the type of people who we have now found out, like in our case, they're going to be motivated to become licensed versus having to pay out $10,000 in fines plus 10 days in jail plus a petty offense on their record.
Mhm.
So that's kind of what I equate it to, like in
I like it.
Colorado,
Yeah.
if you drive drunk or under a substance, you get so many strikes and you go straight to prison. I don't understand when it comes to child safety, why there isn't something that has the same enforcement. You knowingly are putting so many children's lives at stake. Why is there we'll give you a couple more chances, we'll give you some more tries,
Mhm.
and then it also creates revenue for the department as well. If they're issuing those fines, they're receiving that money. That money can then go to further educating unlicensed, unexempt, can go to further, whatever the cause is, whatever it is. But there definitely needs, there, in my viewpoint, from the knowledge that I have, there has been no type of consequence for the providers in our case until that injunction happens. And in our case, that injunction happened after a child died.
Mhm.
And I don't believe, and Mark may or may not be able to tell us but I don't believe that there have been a lot of injunctions given out to unlicensed, unexempt providers for how many there are recorded of having unexempt, unlicensed care in Colorado.
Mhm. Oofda. That's what I say to that. I say oofda. I agree. I think what I hear you talking about are consequences for decisions and for actions, and how more efficiently to tie consequences to actions that have been documented or at least are suspected. And I can see how fines could play a role in that. And I appreciate your comments about motivators. I think that insight is important. I think someone in the chat, we only have just a couple minutes left. Someone in the chat asked about city regulations. My understanding is that most cities do not have additional regulations, except there are zoning regulations. And that was addressed in the last legislature, to allow providers to provide care and to address, how the zoning works. And I know Denver overlaps and essentially adopts, Denver does, the Colorado 7701 and 7702 for at least large group care centers, and 7701, and the city has the authority to issue fines. So in Denver, it sort of looks like a ticket. Yes, Carrie?
So I know in Arvada, when they redid their land development code in the last year, they did specifically refer to Colorado revised statutes to allow legal exemption and licensed settings. But what happens when people, I'm just curious, can the cities help us out on some of this when people are providing care that is outside of the licensing and outside of the legal exemption? Because now they're not only breaking state statute and code, they're breaking city codes as well.
So like I said, the city and county that I'm most familiar with is Denver, and you can be called into court. You get a ticket from your licensing specialist, because they work for both the state and the county at the same time. And you can be called into court and pay a fine. It's a misdemeanor, so up to $1,000 per violation. And there are probationary terms, like hours of service, and potential down the road, time in prison if you violate this repeatedly. So that could be a model to look at. I can see if I can find the website on that so you can see what that looks like and circulate it at the next meeting. All right, my friends, it's almost 7 o'clock. Anyone have last words, last thoughts on this day of amazing, amazing brain work? I'm so impressed with all of you.
I just want to say thank you, Laura. You've done an awesome job.
Oh, well, thanks. I'm just here to help you guys have a forum in which you can say what you need to say. So I'm happy. If it was useful, then I'm excited. What I'm also impressed with is that my dog only once freaked out. That's what I'm super happy about, is that my super loud husky only had one outburst. That makes me happy. Was there a last comment? Sorry, did I interrupt?
No, I was just going to say something. I just wanted to give my personal condolences to Kelsey and just say I'm so sorry that what happened to your family was all of our worst fears, and we are so, so sorry.
Yep.
Your loss is a loss to all of us.
Thank you.
I agree. And my condolences as well.
Thank you. I mean, I appreciate it all, and I appreciate all of the thoughts. We definitely feel them on days that are hard to get up and continue to go on. But there has been so many signs and such a shift in our family's spirituality journey that one thing that does continue to help our family and strengthen it is that we do truly believe that this was all part of Ellie's journey and purpose. And we've seen that, from the day that she died. We came home from the hospital and it was raining.
And that was the first time in Colorado for about, I would say, a month, if not, pretty close to, that it started to rain. And it rained every day until the last time we saw her at the funeral home. And as we were saying goodbye and leaving, it downpoured. And just the shift in our family being more aware to spirituality and people who have reached out to us. I don't know why we were chosen to journey and weather this storm, but we were, and we truly do feel the light and love that each one of you sends us. We can feel it in our hearts and our souls. So thank you for keeping us in your thoughts and in your prayers. And our family, like I said this morning, our family is here to live our grief out loud, and do anything that we can to help the system that is broken. Because even after hearing stuff today, it just, like this shift needed to happen. And it shouldn't have had to happen at the loss of a child, but it did. And it is what it is. Nothing will bring her back, but her legacy will live on, and it will live on through people like you all coming together and making a change for future children. And we are very humble and grateful and appreciative to all of you for that.
Well, we
Not
can't
to
say
end
it
on a
better
cry
than that.
fest.
I know, right?
We can't say it better than that. All right. On that note of inspiring, you're modeling such an amazing use of a tragedy, and your focus and your willingness to engage in this discussion is mind blowing. And so on that note, I will tell everyone to have a great night. Hug all your babies and your dog, Aaron, Aaron's puppy, and find your joy today. And we'll keep working on this until we fix it.
Yep.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.